While my daughter Rebecca was struggling to explain to her friends why she couldn't afford her annual Hamptons vacation rental because of the $89,000 in cruise charges I'd left on her credit cards, I was relaxing in my own $2.3 million waterfront penthouse in Key West, planning my next solo luxury cruise adventure with a personal concierge who understood that being 72 meant having both the wisdom to travel in style and the resources to do it exactly how I wanted. Before we dive into this story, make sure to hit that like button and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been abandoned or dismissed by family members who thought they could control your choices, only to discover they'd just given you the freedom to live your best life without their limitations? Share your story below, because today you're going to learn that sometimes the family members who think they can manipulate your golden years are about to discover they just underestimated the wrong 72-year-old. This story is about the morning when I realized that my own daughter, the child I'd raised as a single mother, put through law school at Harvard, supported through her early career struggles, and helped establish her successful Manhattan law practice, had been systematically planning to abandon me at a cruise terminal in Miami while convincing me it was all about family bonding and making memories together. When I discovered that the daughter I'd sacrificed for, invested over $400,000 in, and trusted with my most vulnerable moments, had been quietly planning to leave me stranded at the dock while she and her husband enjoyed the luxury cruise I'd paid for, positioning herself to control my travel decisions while I was left dealing with the humiliation and logistical nightmare of being abandoned in a foreign port. But what Rebecca Morrison hadn't counted on was that the mother she was planning to abandon wasn't just any 72-year-old woman. She was someone who'd built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire from nothing, who had international business connections spanning 3 decades, and who possessed the kind of financial resources and strategic thinking that would transform her daughter's cruel betrayal into the most expensive mistake of her privileged life. My name is Margaret Catherine Sinclair, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd found the perfect way to reconnect with my daughter Rebecca, while pursuing the luxury travel dreams I'd deferred for decades, while building my career as the founder and CEO of Sinclair Property Holdings, one of Connecticut's most successful independent real estate investment companies. The journey to that devastating betrayal had begun 47 years earlier, in 1976, when I'd been 25 years old, newly divorced, and facing the daunting challenge of raising 8-year-old Rebecca as a single mother with nothing but a high school education, $3,200 in savings, and an unshakable determination that my daughter would never experience the kind of economic uncertainty and dependence on others that had characterized my own childhood in a working-class family in Bridgeport. Rebecca's father, Thomas Morrison, had been a charming but fundamentally irresponsible insurance salesman who'd walked out on our family when the responsibilities of fatherhood and marriage had become more demanding than his taste for freedom and variety. The divorce had left me with full custody of Rebecca, a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Westport with a $47,000 mortgage, and the stark realization that my future and my daughter's opportunities would depend entirely on whatever I could build through my own efforts and intelligence. "Margaret, you're 25 years old with an 8th-grade daughter and no college degree," my sister Linda had said during one of our brutally honest conversations about my situation. "You need to be realistic about what you can accomplish as a single mother. Maybe you should consider moving back home with mom and dad until you can find a husband who can provide stability." But I'd already made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I would never again depend on anyone else for my security or my daughter's future. If Rebecca was going to have the opportunities I'd never had, I would create them through whatever combination of work, sacrifice, and strategic thinking was required. My first job after the divorce had been as a secretary at Hammond & Associates, Real Estate, a small commercial property firm in Norwalk that handled lease negotiations and property management for local businesses. The position paid $280 per week, barely enough to cover our mortgage, groceries, and childcare. but it provided something more valuable than immediate income: exposure to the real estate industry and the opportunity to learn how property transactions worked from the inside. Mrs. Sinclair, you have an exceptional ability to understand complex lease structures and market dynamics, my supervisor, Robert Hammond, had observed after I'd been working there for 8 months. Most secretaries just type the contracts. You actually understand what they mean and why they're structured the way they are. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted to property coordinator, then to junior analyst, and finally to associate broker, each promotion accompanied by increased responsibilities, higher commissions, and most importantly, deeper understanding of how successful real estate professionals built wealth through strategic property investments rather than just transaction commissions. The turning point had come in 1981 when Rebecca was 13 and I'd been working in real estate for 5 years. I'd saved $15,000, a significant achievement given our modest budget, and Robert Hammond had offered me the opportunity to purchase a small duplex in Stamford that was being sold as part of an estate settlement. Margaret, this property, needs work, but it's priced below market because the family wants a quick sale, Robert had explained. The rental income from both units would cover the mortgage and maintenance costs, and if you renovate strategically, you could build substantial equity within a few years. The decision to purchase that duplex had been both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd never taken on debt beyond our modest home mortgage, had never been responsible for rental tenants, and had never managed a renovation project. But I'd also recognized that this was exactly the kind of opportunity that could transform our financial trajectory from paycheck to paycheck survival to genuine wealth building. "Mom, are you sure we can afford this?" Rebecca had asked as we'd walked through the duplex together, examining the worn carpets, outdated kitchen, and the obvious need for new paint throughout. "What if the tenants don't pay rent? What if something expensive breaks?" "Honey, sometimes you have to take calculated risks to create better opportunities," I'd replied, already visualizing how the property could be improved and what kind of rental income it could generate. "This duplex could help pay for your college, education, and give us the kind of financial security we've never had." The Stamford duplex had been everything I'd hoped and more. Within 6 months, I'd renovated both units with modern appliances, new flooring, and fresh paint that had transformed them from tired rental properties into attractive homes that commanded premium rents. The monthly rental income of $1,400 had not only covered the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance costs, but had also generated a surplus of $380 per month that I'd immediately begun reinvesting in additional property opportunities. By 1985, when Rebecca was 17 and preparing for college applications, I'd expanded my portfolio to include 4 rental properties, had been promoted to senior associate at Hammond & Associates, and had begun developing the expertise in property development and market analysis that would eventually make Sinclair Property Holdings one of Connecticut's most successful independent real estate companies. "Mrs. Sinclair, your analytical approach to property investment is remarkable." James Patterson, president of First National Bank of Westport, had told me during a meeting to discuss financing for my 5th property acquisition. "Most small investors focus on single properties, but you're building a systematically diversified portfolio with the kind of strategic planning we usually see only from institutional investors." The success of my property investments had also provided the financial foundation for ensuring Rebecca had every educational opportunity I'd never been able to afford. Her tuition at Miss Porter's school, the same prestigious preparatory academy where I'd worked briefly as an administrative assistant to understand how elite education operated, had cost $18,000 annually for 4 years, representing a significant portion of my real estate income, but providing Rebecca with the kind of academic preparation and social connections that would open doors throughout her life. Margaret, Rebecca is one of the most intellectually curious and academically gifted students we've had in years, her faculty advisor at Miss Porter's had written in a college recommendation letter. Her combination of analytical intelligence and social responsibility makes her an ideal candidate for the most competitive university programs. Rebecca's acceptance to Yale University in 1991 had been both a tremendous source of pride and a significant financial challenge that had required me to leverage my real estate portfolio in ways that had stretched my resources but had demonstrated my absolute commitment to her educational success. Yale's tuition, room, and board had cost $24,000 annually in 1991, $96,000 total over 4 years, representing nearly half of my annual income from property rentals and real estate commissions. But I'd also understood that Yale represented exactly the kind of elite educational credential that would position Rebecca for the most competitive graduate programs and professional opportunities. "Mom, I know Yale is expensive," Rebecca had said during one of our college planning conversations. "Maybe I should consider UConn or one of the other state schools where the tuition would be more manageable." "Rebecca, you've worked incredibly hard to earn admission to one of the best universities in the world," I'd replied. "We'll find a way to make the finances work. This is exactly the kind of investment in your future that I've been building my business to support." To fund Rebecca's Yale education, I'd refinanced 3 of my rental properties, taken a second mortgage on our family home, and expanded my real estate business to include property development projects that generated higher profits but also required more sophisticated financing and project management skills. The development work had been both challenging and rewarding, involving the purchase of undervalued properties, strategic renovations that increased market value, and sales to buyers who appreciated quality construction and design. My first development project, a complete renovation of a 1920s colonial in Westport, had generated a $47,000 profit that had covered Rebecca's entire freshman year at Yale. "Mrs. Sinclair, your renovation work demonstrates exceptional understanding of what buyers want in today's market," the realtor who'd handled the sale had observed. "You've transformed this property from a dated house into a contemporary home that appeals to affluent families looking for both character and modern convenience." Rebecca's acceptance to Harvard Law School in 1995 had represented the culmination of everything I'd worked to achieve as a single mother. My daughter had earned admission to the most prestigious law school in the country, positioning herself for a career that would provide the kind of professional success and financial security I'd always dreamed of for her. But Harvard Law School had also represented the largest financial challenge of my entire career as a real estate investor. Tuition, living expenses, and books had cost $38,000 annually, $114,000 total over 3 years, requiring me to expand my business operations in ways that had transformed Sinclair Property Holdings from a small rental property company into a comprehensive real estate development and investment firm. To fund Rebecca's legal education, I'd purchased and renovated 6 additional properties, had begun developing small, commercial projects, and had established relationships with private investors who provided capital for larger development opportunities in exchange for partnership shares in the profits. "Margaret, you've built something remarkable here," David Chen, a private investor who'd partnered with me on a small office building project, had observed during one of our business meetings. "Most real estate professionals focus on either residential or commercial properties, but you've developed expertise across multiple property types and market segments." The diversification of my business had also provided the kind of consistent cash flow that had allowed me to support Rebecca's law school expenses without compromising the growth potential of my property portfolio. By the time Rebecca graduated from Harvard Law in 1998, Sinclair Property Holdings owned or had development interests in 23 properties, employed 4 full-time staff members, and generated annual revenues of approximately $1.8 million. Rebecca's graduation from Harvard Law School had been followed by a federal clerkship with Judge Patricia Williams of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, a prestigious position that had provided exceptional training in legal research and writing, while also creating networking opportunities that would influence her entire career. But the clerkship had paid only $32,000 annually, far below what was necessary to service Rebecca's student loans and maintain a professional lifestyle in New York City. Without hesitation, I'd provided an additional $24,000 annually to supplement her income, ensuring that she could focus on her legal work rather than worrying about financial survival. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done," Rebecca had said during one of our weekly phone conversations. "The clerkship is an incredible opportunity, but I couldn't afford to take it without your support." "Rebecca, you've worked incredibly hard to earn these opportunities," I'd replied. "My job as your mother is to make sure financial concerns don't prevent you from achieving your full potential." After the clerkship, Rebecca had been hired as an associate at Covington and Burling, one of Manhattan's most prestigious corporate law firms. The starting salary of $165,000 had been substantial, but the demands of big law practice, 80-hour weeks, constant pressure, and minimal work-life balance had also required continued financial and emotional support as she'd established herself in an intensely competitive professional environment. I'd helped with the security deposit and first year's rent on her Upper East Side apartment, $4,800 per month for a one-bedroom that had been necessary for maintaining the professional image required in elite legal practice. I'd also provided a $15,000 clothing allowance for the kind of professional wardrobe that had been essential for client meetings and court appearances. "Eleanor, your mother's support has been incredible," Rebecca's colleague James Murphy had told me during a law firm social event. Most young associates struggle financially for years while building their careers. Rebecca's been able to focus entirely on developing her legal skills because she doesn't have the financial stress that affects so many of our junior lawyers. Rebecca's marriage to David Morrison in 2003 had been a beautiful celebration of her personal happiness and professional success. David had been a fellow Harvard Law graduate who'd established himself as a corporate tax attorney at another prestigious Manhattan firm, and their combined income of over $400,000 annually had finally provided the financial independence that had allowed Rebecca to reduce her reliance on my support. But even after their marriage, I'd continued to contribute to major life events and financial milestones that had helped establish their lifestyle and professional standing. I'd provided $50,000 toward the down payment on their $1.2 million Manhattan co-op, had funded their $35,000 wedding and honeymoon in Italy, and had established a $25,000 emergency fund that had provided security during the early years of their marriage. "Margaret, we're so grateful for everything you've done to help us get established," David had said during one of our family dinners. "Your support has made it possible for us to focus on building our careers rather than worrying about basics, financial stability." The investment I'd made in Rebecca's education and career launch had totaled approximately $400,000 over 15 years. A substantial portion of my wealth, but also the fulfillment of everything I'd worked to achieve as a single mother. Rebecca had become exactly what I'd dreamed: a successful professional with financial security, social standing, and the kind of opportunities I'd never been able to imagine for myself. By 2018, when I'd turned 70 and had begun transitioning from active real estate development to portfolio management and travel, Sinclair Property Holdings had grown to include 43 rental units, 12 commercial properties, and development partnerships worth approximately $8.2 million. More importantly, the business generated sufficient passive income that I could pursue the luxury travel experiences I'd deferred for decades while building my career and supporting Rebecca's education. My first major international trip had been a 3-week cultural tour of Italy in 2019, a journey that had combined art history, culinary experiences, and the kind of sophisticated travel that had seemed impossible during my years as a struggling single mother. The trip had cost $18,000, representing a significant expense, but also the beginning of what I'd hoped would be years of cultural exploration and personal enrichment. "Mom, those Italy photographs are absolutely stunning," Rebecca had said when I'd returned with extensive documentation of Renaissance art, Tuscan landscapes, and the kind of authentic cultural experiences that had enriched my understanding of history and beauty. You look so happy and energized. Travel clearly agrees. With you, Rebecca's initial enthusiasm for my travel experiences had encouraged me to plan more ambitious journeys. A luxury river cruise through Central Europe, a cultural expedition to Egypt, and the Mediterranean cruise that would become the setting for her ultimate betrayal. But as my travel experiences had become more frequent and expensive, I'd begun to notice subtle changes in Rebecca and David's attitude toward my adventures. Questions about travel insurance, concerns about international medical care, and suggestions that I consider more practical vacation options had initially seemed like natural expressions of concern, but had actually been early indicators of their growing anxiety about my travel spending. "Mom, don't you think $25,000 for a 3-week cruise is a bit excessive?" Rebecca had asked during one of our dinner conversations. "You could take several smaller trips for that amount of money." What I hadn't understood at the time was that Rebecca and David had been calculating every dollar I'd spent on travel as money that wouldn't be available for their eventual inheritance, and they'd begun developing a plan to demonstrate that my travel adventures were evidence of poor judgment that required family intervention and control. Standing in my Westport home that March morning in 2023, surrounded by Mediterranean cruise brochures and excited about the mother-daughter bonding experience I'd been planning for months, I'd had no idea that Rebecca had been coordinating with David to turn our family vacation into a demonstration of my supposed incompetence and need for supervision. The successful real estate investor, who'd built a multi-million-dollar business empire while raising a Harvard-educated daughter as a single mother, was about to discover that her greatest accomplishment, Rebecca's success and independence, had somehow transformed her into someone who viewed her mother's wealth and freedom as obstacles to her own financial security. Sometimes the children you sacrifice everything to educate become the adults who think they're entitled to control your choices. Rebecca and David were about to learn that the woman they planned to abandon at a cruise dock was actually someone with the resources, connections, and determination to ensure they regretted their betrayal for the rest of their privileged lives. Standing in my Westport home that March morning, still processing the subtle but growing resistance I'd been sensing from Rebecca and David regarding my travel plans, I realized that to understand how I'd reached this point of family tension, you need to know about the woman they were planning to abandon. Someone who'd spent 47 years proving that underestimating her intelligence, resourcefulness, and determination was the kind of mistake that came with permanent consequences. The journey from that frightened 25-year-old divorced mother to the 72-year-old real estate mogul they were attempting to manipulate had been built on a foundation of strategic thinking, calculated risk-taking, and the kind of business acumen that had transformed every challenge into an opportunity for growth and expansion. My education in real estate investing had begun not in boardrooms or business schools, but in the cramped back office of Hammond & Associates, where I'd spent countless evenings after Rebecca had gone to bed, studying property reports, analyzing market trends, and teaching myself the fundamental principles that would eventually make Sinclair Property Holdings one of Connecticut's most successful independent real estate companies. "Margaret, most people in this business focus on short-term commissions," Robert Hammond had observed during one of our late-night strategy sessions in 1979. "But you're thinking like an investor, analyzing long-term market trends, understanding property appreciation cycles, and building relationships that will generate value for decades rather than just individual transactions." The analytical skills that would characterize my entire business career had been developed through necessity. Rather than formal training, every property purchase had required me to master new areas of expertise: construction and renovation costs, rental market analysis, financing strategies, tax implications, and the complex legal frameworks that governed real estate transactions in Connecticut and New York. My first major educational breakthrough had come in 1982, when I'd enrolled in evening classes at Fairfield University's MBA program, not to earn a degree, but to understand the financial and strategic principles that successful business owners use to build and manage complex enterprises. The classes. In corporate finance, strategic planning, and real estate economics had provided the theoretical framework for strategies I'd been developing through practical experience. Mrs. Sinclair, your approach to real estate investment demonstrates sophisticated understanding of market dynamics and financial analysis, Professor James Mitchell had told me after a presentation I'd given about my duplex renovation project. You're applying institutional-level strategic thinking to individual property investments in ways that could be scaled into much larger operations. The academic validation had been important, but more valuable had been the networking opportunities with other business professionals who'd shared insights about everything from commercial financing to international investment strategies that would influence my business development for decades. By 1985, when Rebecca was 17 and preparing for her senior year at Miss Porter's, my property portfolio had grown to include 8 rental units across 3 different properties. But more importantly, I'd begun to understand that real estate success required more than just buying and renting properties. It required developing systematic approaches to market analysis, property improvement, and tenant management that could be replicated and scaled as opportunities emerged. The breakthrough that had transformed my business from small-scale property ownership to legitimate real estate development had come through my relationship with Maria Santos, a Portuguese immigrant who'd owned a small construction company specializing in residential renovations. Maria had approached me about a partnership opportunity involving a rundown Victorian house in Norwalk that could be purchased for $47,000, renovated for approximately $35,000, and resold for $125,000, a profit potential of over $40,000 if the project could be managed efficiently. Mrs. Sinclair, you understand property values and market trends better than anyone I've worked with, Maria had explained during our first partnership meeting. I have the construction expertise and crew management experience, but I need a partner who can handle the financial analysis, permitting processes, and sales strategy. The Victorian renovation project had been my introduction to property development rather than just property ownership, requiring me to coordinate architects, contractors, permit applications, and sales marketing, while also managing the substantial financial risks associated with a project that would tie up most of my available capital for 6 months. Mom, this renovation project seems much more complicated than our rental properties, Rebecca had observed as she'd helped me review construction, schedules, and budget projections. Are you sure we can handle something this complex? Rebecca, every business grows by taking on challenges that seem impossible at first, I'd replied, studying the architectural plans that would transform a deteriorating house into an attractive family home. The skills I've developed managing rental properties are exactly what I need for development projects, just on a larger scale with more potential reward. The Victorian project had been everything I'd hoped and more. The house had sold within 2 weeks of completion for $128,000, $3,000 above our target price, generating a net profit of $46,000 that had immediately been reinvested in 2 additional development opportunities. More importantly, the project had established my reputation as a sophisticated developer who could manage complex renovations while maintaining quality standards and budget discipline. Margaret, your attention to detail and project management skills are exceptional, the real estate agent who'd handled the sale had told me. Buyers were impressed not just by the renovation quality, but by the thoughtful design choices that made the house feel like a custom home rather than a generic flip. The success of the Victorian renovation had led to a systematic expansion into property development that had required me to master new areas of expertise: construction management, design coordination, building codes and permits, subcontractor, relationships, and the complex logistics of coordinating multiple trades and timelines to complete projects on schedule and within budget. My partnership with Maria Santos had evolved into a formal business relationship where I handled the financial, legal, and marketing aspects of development projects while she managed construction crews, material procurement, and the hands-on work of transforming properties from deteriorated houses into attractive modern homes. Margaret, you have a natural talent for visualizing how properties can be improved, Maria had observed during one of our project planning sessions. Most investors focus only on numbers, but you understand design elements and construction possibilities that make properties more valuable and appealing to buyers. Between 1985 and 1990, we'd completed 12 renovation projects, ranging from simple cosmetic updates to complete structural renovations that had required new electrical systems, plumbing, and HVAC installations. Each project had generated profits ranging from $15,000 to $65,000, but more importantly, had built my expertise in every aspect of residential construction and renovation. The construction knowledge had also enhanced the value of my rental properties, as I'd been able to perform many maintenance and improvement tasks myself rather than hiring expensive contractors for routine work. My tenants had appreciated having a landlord who understood their maintenance needs and could address problems quickly and professionally. Mrs. Sinclair, you're the most knowledgeable and responsive landlord we've ever had, one of my long-term tenants had told me. When our heating system needed repair, you understood exactly what was wrong and had it fixed the same day. Most landlords would have taken weeks to coordinate that kind of repair. The transition from residential development to commercial real estate had occurred in 1991, when I'd been approached by Thomas Chen, a small business owner who'd needed help finding and renovating office space for his expanding accounting practice. Thomas had been frustrated by the limited availability of affordable commercial space in Fairfield County and had asked whether I'd consider purchasing and renovating a small office building that could accommodate multiple professional tenants. Margaret, your reputation for quality renovation work is well known in the business community, Thomas had explained. Several of us are looking for professional office space that's more affordable than the premium buildings, but still maintains the kind of image our clients expect. The commercial opportunity had been both appealing and challenging. Commercial properties required larger initial investments, more complex financing arrangements, and expertise in areas like ADA compliance, commercial leasing, and tenant improvement, allowances that differed significantly from residential real estate. But commercial properties also offered several advantages: longer lease terms that provided income stability, triple net lease arrangements where tenants paid for maintenance and utilities, and rental rates that were significantly higher than residential properties. The potential return on investment had been compelling enough to justify the additional complexity and risk. My first commercial project had been a 4,200 square foot office building in Stamford that I'd purchased for $180,000 and renovated for $85,000, creating modern office suites that could accommodate 4 professional tenants. The renovation had included new flooring, lighting, HVAC systems, and the kind of sophisticated finishes that would appeal to lawyers, accountants, and other professionals who needed impressive office environments. Mrs. Sinclair, this renovation has exceeded all our expectations, Thomas Chen had said during the building's grand opening. You've created exactly the kind of professional environment we needed at a fraction of the cost of premium office buildings. The commercial building had leased completely within 3 months, generating annual rental income of $48,000, nearly double what the same investment would have produced in residential properties. More importantly, the commercial tenants had signed 5-year leases with annual rent increases, providing the kind of predictable income growth that had allowed me to expand my development activities while maintaining stable cash flow. By 1995, when Rebecca had been in her second year at Harvard Law School, Sinclair Property Holdings had evolved from a small rental property business into a sophisticated real estate development company with expertise spanning residential renovation, commercial property development, construction management, and investment analysis. The business employed 6 full-time staff members: Maria Santos as construction manager, Patricia Williams as property manager, James Rodriguez as financial analyst, Susan Park as marketing coordinator, David Kim as maintenance supervisor, and Linda Foster as administrative coordinator. Each team member had been carefully selected for specific expertise that complemented my own skills in strategic planning and business development. "Margaret, you've built something remarkable here," Robert Hammond had observed during one of our quarterly business reviews. Most real estate professionals remain generalists throughout their careers, but you've developed institutional-level expertise across every aspect of property development and management. The systematic approach I'd developed for evaluating and executing development projects had become a template that could be applied to opportunities throughout Connecticut and southern New York. Each potential project was analyzed using standardized criteria: acquisition cost, renovation requirements, market comparables, financing options, timeline projections, and profit potential that had to meet minimum return thresholds before I'd commit resources. "Mrs. Sinclair, your due diligence process is more thorough than most institutional investors," Patricia Williams had noted during one of our project evaluation meetings. "You analyze every aspect of potential investments with the kind of systematic approach that eliminates most of the risks that cause other developers to fail." The systematic approach had also enabled me to expand into larger and more complex projects. By 1998, I'd completed the renovation of a 12,000 square foot mixed-use building that included retail space, office suites, and residential apartments, a project that had required coordinating multiple financing sources, managing complex zoning requirements, and overseeing construction work that had lasted 14 months. The success of Sinclair Property Holdings had also created opportunities for international business relationships that had expanded my understanding of global real estate markets and had provided the cultural education and travel experiences that would become central to my retirement lifestyle. In 1999, I'd been invited to participate in an international real estate investment conference in London, where I'd met developers and investors from 12 different countries who'd shared insights about property markets, construction techniques, and investment strategies that had influenced my business development for years afterward. "Margaret, your analytical approach to property development is impressive," Alessandro Ricci, an Italian developer who'd specialized in historic property renovation, had told me during one of the conference networking sessions. "American developers typically focus on speed and efficiency, but you clearly understand the importance of quality and design that creates long-term value." The international connections had led to several collaborative projects, including a partnership with Alessandro to purchase and renovate a small villa in Tuscany that had been marketed to American buyers seeking authentic Italian properties. The project had required me to navigate Italian property laws, construction regulations, and cultural differences while managing renovation work from 3,000 miles away. "Mrs. Sinclair, your ability to coordinate international projects demonstrates exceptional organizational skills," Alessandro had written in a testimonial letter. "Managing construction work across different time zones, languages, and legal systems requires the kind of systematic thinking that characterizes truly sophisticated business professionals." The Italian project had been both profitable and personally enriching, providing insights into European construction techniques, design sensibilities, and business practices that had enhanced my expertise while also satisfying my growing interest in international travel and cultural exploration. As Sinclair Property Holdings had grown in scope and complexity, I'd also invested heavily in technology systems that had enhanced our operational efficiency while providing the kind of data analysis and project management capabilities that had distinguished our business from smaller, less sophisticated competitors. In 2001, I'd implemented a comprehensive property management software system that had integrated tenant relations, maintenance scheduling, financial reporting, and market analysis into a single platform that had provided real-time insights into every aspect of our business operations. "Margaret, your technology integration is years ahead of most real estate companies," James Rodriguez had observed after we'd completed the software implementation. The data analysis capabilities we now have will allow us to make much more informed decisions about property acquisitions, renovation priorities, and market timing. The technology investment had also enabled us to expand our property management services to other real estate investors who'd needed professional management for their own rental properties. The property management division had generated additional revenue while also providing market intelligence about rental trends, tenant preferences, and maintenance issues that had informed our own development decisions. Sinclair Property Holdings provides the most professional and efficient property management services we've ever experienced. Dr. Patricia Chen, a physician who'd owned several rental properties, had told me. Your technology systems and systematic approach to tenant relations have eliminated most of the headaches typically associated with rental property ownership. By 2005, when Rebecca had been established in her law career for several years, my business had achieved the kind of financial sophistication that had enabled us to participate in larger development projects and investment opportunities that had required complex financing arrangements and institutional-level analysis. I'd established relationships with 3 different banks, 2 private investment groups, and a commercial mortgage broker who'd provided access to financing options that had allowed us to pursue opportunities that would have been impossible with only my personal resources. Mrs. Sinclair, your financial planning and risk management are exceptional. Michael Thompson, a commercial lending officer at First National Bank, had told me during a loan review meeting. Your business maintains the kind of conservative debt-to-equity ratios and cash reserve requirements that institutional investors require. The financial discipline had been crucial during the 2008 recession, when many real estate developers had faced bankruptcy due to over-leveraging and inadequate cash reserves. Sinclair Property Holdings had not only survived the recession, but had actually expanded during the downturn by purchasing distressed properties at below-market prices and renovating them while construction costs had been reduced due to decreased demand. Margaret, your business strategy during the recession demonstrated exactly the kind of counter-cyclical thinking that separates successful investors from those who simply follow market trends, Patricia Williams had observed. While other developers were struggling with foreclosures, you were positioning yourself for the recovery by acquiring high-quality properties at exceptional prices. As my expertise and business success had become recognized within Connecticut's real estate community, I'd also become a mentor to younger professionals who'd sought guidance about property development, business management, and strategic planning. The mentorship activities had included speaking at real estate investment clubs, guest lecturing at business schools, and consulting with startup development companies that had needed advice about everything from financing strategies to construction management. Mrs. Sinclair, your willingness to share expertise and mentor younger professionals has had tremendous impact on our industry. Janet Morrison, president of the Connecticut Real Estate Investors Association, had said during an award ceremony, where I'd been recognized for my contributions to the real estate community. The industry recognition had included appointments to the Westport Planning Commission, the Connecticut Real Estate Investment Council, and the Small Business Development Advisory Board, positions that had provided opportunities to influence policy decisions while also staying current with regulatory changes and market trends. By 2015, when I'd begun transitioning from active development to portfolio management, Sinclair Property Holdings had achieved assets worth approximately $8.2 million, annual revenues of $1.8 million, and net income that had provided complete financial independence while also supporting the luxury travel lifestyle that had become my primary passion. The wealth accumulation had been the result of 40 years of systematic reinvestment, strategic property acquisitions, and the kind of long-term planning that had transformed every business success into the foundation for larger opportunities and enhanced financial security. Margaret, you've achieved something remarkable. David Chen, my business attorney, had told me during one of our annual business reviews. Most entrepreneurs spend their entire careers building businesses that provide comfortable livings. You've built an enterprise that has created genuine wealth while also contributing meaningfully to your community. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my business success had been the knowledge that every dollar I'd earned had been the result of my own intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking. No one had given me advantages or opportunities. I'd created them through systematic effort and the determination to prove that a divorced single mother with a high school education could build something significant and lasting. Standing in my Westport home that March morning, surrounded by the Mediterranean cruise planning materials that represented the latest chapter in my travel adventures, I'd had no idea that Rebecca and David had been viewing my business achievements not as evidence of my competence and independence, but as assets they were entitled to control and inherit. The successful real estate developer who'd spent 47 years proving that intelligence and determination could overcome any obstacle was about to discover that her greatest challenge would come not from market conditions or business competitors, but from family members who'd forgotten that the woman they were planning to abandon was someone who'd never backed down from a fight and had never lost a strategic battle when the stakes were important enough to matter. Sometimes the people who benefit most from your success are the ones who understand it least. Rebecca and David were about to learn that underestimating someone who'd built a multi-million-dollar business empire from nothing was the kind of mistake that came with consequences they'd never anticipated and would never forget. Standing in my Westport home that March morning, still processing the growing tension I'd been sensing from Rebecca and David regarding my travel plans, I couldn't help but remember how different things had been just 3 years earlier, when Rebecca had first suggested that we plan a major trip together and had spoken with such genuine enthusiasm about sharing cultural experiences and creating memories that would strengthen our mother-daughter bond for years to come. It was a conversation that had taken place during what I now recognize as the golden period of our adult relationship. A time when Rebecca seemed genuinely committed to honoring the sacrifices I'd made for her success while building the kind of sophisticated, mutually respectful relationship that had represented everything I'd dreamed of achieving as a single mother who'd worked for decades to provide her daughter with opportunities I'd never had. The golden period had begun in earnest in 2018 when I'd turned 70 and had made the decision to transition from active real estate development to portfolio management, finally allowing myself to pursue the luxury travel experiences I'd deferred for decades while building my business and supporting Rebecca's education and career launch. The transition had been both financially and emotionally satisfying. Sinclair Property Holdings had achieved sufficient scale and operational efficiency that the business could generate substantial passive income while requiring minimal daily oversight, freeing me to explore the world with the kind of leisure and sophistication that had seemed impossible during my years as a struggling single mother and ambitious entrepreneur. "Mom, you've earned the right to enjoy your success," Rebecca had said during one of our family dinners in Manhattan, her voice carrying what had seemed like genuine pride in my achievements and excitement about my newfound freedom. "You've spent 40 years building your business and supporting my education. Now it's time for you to focus on your own dreams and interests." Rebecca's encouragement had been accompanied by practical support and enthusiasm that had made me believe she truly understood the importance of travel and cultural exploration for someone who'd spent decades focused on work and family responsibilities rather than personal enrichment and adventure. "I've been reading about luxury travel options for sophisticated travelers," Rebecca had continued. "There are incredible cultural tours, cooking schools in Europe, art history programs in Italy, exactly the kind of experiences that would appeal to someone with your intelligence and curiosity." The conversation had taken place at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants, where Rebecca and David had invited me for a celebration dinner marking both my 70th birthday and the successful completion of my final major development project, a mixed-use building in Stamford that had sold for $2.8 million, generating a profit of $740,000 that had provided the perfect capstone to my development career. "Margaret, you've achieved something remarkable," David had added, raising his glass of vintage Bordeaux in a toast that had seemed heartfelt and genuine. Most people spend their entire careers working for someone else. You built an empire from nothing while raising one of the most successful attorneys in New York. That's an achievement worth celebrating and honoring. My first major international trip after the retirement transition had been a 3-week cultural exploration of Italy in the spring of 2019. A journey that had combined art history, culinary education, and the kind of sophisticated travel experiences that had seemed like impossible luxuries during my years of financial struggle and single motherhood. The Italy trip had been organized by Exclusive Cultural Expeditions, a luxury travel company that specialized in small group experiences led by art historians, museum curators, and local experts who could provide insights far beyond typical tourist activities. The itinerary had included private tours of the Vatican museums, cooking classes with master chefs in Tuscany, and exclusive access to Renaissance palazzos that weren't open to general tourism. Mrs. Sinclair, your appreciation for Renaissance art and Italian cultural history makes this tour particularly rewarding for our guides. Dr. Alessandro Martinelli, our art history lecturer, had told me during a private viewing of Caravaggio paintings at the Palazzo al Temps. Most travelers focus on famous landmarks, but you're genuinely interested in understanding the cultural contexts that created these masterpieces. The trip had cost $22,000, a substantial expense that had represented the largest single personal expenditure of my life, but also an investment in the kind of cultural education and personal enrichment that I'd dreamed of pursuing since my college-age years when financial constraints had made such experiences impossible. More importantly, the Italy experience had provided validation that luxury travel could be both intellectually stimulating and personally transformative for someone who'd spent decades focused on business responsibilities rather than cultural exploration and artistic appreciation. "Mom, your Italy photographs are absolutely incredible," Rebecca had said when I'd returned to Westport with over 800 photographs, dozens of art books, and stories about cultural experiences that had exceeded my most optimistic expectations. "You look so happy and confident in these pictures. Travel clearly brings out the best in you." Rebecca's enthusiasm for my travel experiences had been accompanied by detailed questions about the places I'd visited, the cultural insights I'd gained, and the logistics of managing complex international travel as a solo senior traveler. Her genuine interest had encouraged me to share not just photographs and souvenirs, but also the deeper personal significance of pursuing dreams I'd deferred for so many years. The private tour of the Sistine Chapel was probably the most moving experience of my entire life, I'd told Rebecca and David during a dinner party, where they'd encouraged me to share travel stories with their friends and colleagues. Standing in that space where Michelangelo created such beauty, with an art historian explaining the political and religious contexts, it was like seeing the Renaissance come alive. The dinner party had been held at Rebecca and David's Upper East Side apartment, an elegant gathering for 12 guests that had included several of Rebecca's law firm partners, David's tax colleagues, and friends from their sophisticated Manhattan social circle. The evening had been designed specifically to celebrate my travel achievements, while also demonstrating to their professional network that Rebecca came from a family that valued cultural sophistication and international experience. Eleanor's travel adventures are absolutely inspiring, Jennifer Walsh, one of Rebecca's law partners, had observed during the dinner conversation. "Most people your age are settling into quiet retirement, but you're pursuing cultural education with more energy and sophistication than people half your age." The social recognition of my travel experiences had been deeply satisfying, validating both the financial investments I'd been making in luxury travel and the personal courage required to pursue international adventures as a 70-year-old woman traveling alone in foreign countries where I didn't speak the local languages. Rebecca and David's friends had been genuinely impressed by the scope and sophistication of my Italy experiences, asking detailed questions about everything from the cooking classes in Tuscany to the private museum tours in Florence and Rome. Their interest had demonstrated that my travel adventures were contributing to Rebecca and David's social standing within Manhattan's competitive professional community. "Rebecca, your mother is absolutely remarkable," Dr. Patricia Chen, one of David's tax clients, had said during the dinner party. "Her cultural knowledge and travel experiences are exactly what I hope to pursue when I retire from my medical practice. She's an inspiration for what's possible in retirement when you refuse to accept limitations." The community validation had encouraged Rebecca and David to include me in additional social events, where my travel experiences had become sources of sophisticated conversation and family pride. I'd been invited to charity fundraisers, professional networking events, and cultural activities where my stories about Italian art, Renaissance history, and luxury travel had enhanced Rebecca and David's reputation as a cultured, accomplished family. "Margaret, you've become quite the celebrity in our social circle," David had told me after a particularly successful charity gala, where I'd been seated at the head table and had spent the evening discussing Italian art with museum board members and cultural patrons. "People are fascinated by your travel adventures and impressed by your cultural knowledge." The social success had also provided opportunities for me to develop friendships with other sophisticated travelers who shared my interest in cultural exploration and luxury travel experiences. Several of Rebecca and David's friends had expressed interest in joining me for future travel adventures, suggesting group trips that would combine my travel planning expertise with their own interests in art, history, and culinary exploration. Encouraged by the success of my Italy experience and the enthusiastic support I'd received from Rebecca, David, and their social circle, I'd planned an even more ambitious journey for the fall of 2019, a luxury archaeological tour of Egypt that would combine historical education, cultural immersion, and the kind of exclusive access to ancient sites that required both substantial financial investment and sophisticated travel arrangements. The Egypt expedition had been organized by Archaeological Travel Adventures, a company that specialized in educational tours led by Egyptologists, museum curators, and archaeological researchers who could provide scholarly insights into ancient Egyptian civilization, religious practices, and artistic achievements. "Mrs. Sinclair, your questions about Egyptian religious symbolism and architectural techniques demonstrate exceptional preparation and intellectual curiosity," Dr. Sarah Mitchell, our Egyptologist guide, had told me during a private tour of the Valley of the Kings. "Most travelers are satisfied with basic information about pharaohs and pyramids, but you're interested in understanding the cultural and spiritual contexts that influenced ancient Egyptian civilization." The Egypt trip had included experiences that had exceeded even my ambitious expectations. Sunrise hot air balloon rides over the Valley of the Kings, private dinners in temple complexes after they'd been closed to other tourists, and exclusive access to archaeological sites that required special permits and academic connections. The total cost had been $28,000, significantly more than my Italy adventure, but also a more complex and exclusive experience that had provided insights into ancient history and archaeology that would have been impossible through conventional tourism. "Mom, your Egypt photographs are absolutely stunning," Rebecca had said when I'd returned with extensive documentation of ancient temples, archaeological discoveries, and the kind of exclusive cultural experiences that demonstrated both my adventurous spirit and my ability to manage complex international travel independently. Rebecca's continued enthusiasm for my travel achievements had been accompanied by practical offers of assistance with travel planning, logistics coordination, and emergency support that had demonstrated genuine concern for my safety and success rather than attempts to control or limit my independence. "I want to help you research your next adventure," Rebecca had offered during one of our weekly phone conversations. "My legal research skills could be useful for investigating travel companies, understanding international insurance requirements, and ensuring you have all the documentation you need for safe and successful trips." The offer had seemed both thoughtful and practical, reflecting Rebecca's professional expertise while also acknowledging my independence and decision-making authority regarding travel destinations and experiences. The idea for Mediterranean cruise travel had emerged during the winter of 2020, when I'd been researching travel options that would allow me to visit multiple European destinations while maintaining the luxury accommodations and sophisticated cultural programming that had made my Italy and Egypt experiences so rewarding. Luxury. Cruise travel had appealed to me for several practical reasons. The ability to visit multiple countries without constantly packing and unpacking, access to cultural experts and educational programming, sophisticated dining and entertainment options, and the social opportunities that came from traveling with other educated, affluent passengers who shared similar interests in cultural exploration. Mom, cruise travel sounds perfect for someone with your interests and travel style, Rebecca had said when I'd shared my preliminary research about Mediterranean cruise options. You'd have all the luxury and convenience you enjoy, plus the opportunity to explore multiple destinations with the kind of cultural depth you appreciate. Rebecca's enthusiasm for cruise travel had led to several months of collaborative research, and planning that had brought us closer together than we'd been since her childhood. We'd spent hours reviewing cruise line options, comparing itineraries, and discussing shore excursions that would provide the most meaningful cultural experiences in Italy, Greece, and the French Riviera. I think this could be an incredible opportunity for us to travel together, Rebecca had suggested during one of our cruise planning sessions. You have all the travel expertise and cultural knowledge, and I could contribute my organizational skills and research abilities. We could create the perfect mother-daughter adventure. The suggestion of traveling together had been both appealing and meaningful. Despite our close relationship, Rebecca and I had never taken a major trip together, and the idea of sharing cultural experiences that had become so important to my retirement happiness had seemed like the perfect way to strengthen our family bond while introducing Rebecca to the kind of sophisticated travel that had enriched my understanding of history, art, and different cultures. Rebecca, I would love to share these travel experiences with you, I'd replied, already imagining the conversations we could have about Renaissance art in Italian ports, ancient history in Greek destinations, and contemporary culture throughout the Mediterranean region. The planning process for our Mediterranean cruise had extended over 6 months, from January through June 2023, and had involved the kind of detailed research and coordination that had demonstrated both my travel expertise and Rebecca's genuine interest in creating a meaningful shared experience. We'd evaluated 12 different cruise lines before selecting Celebrity Eclipse, a luxury vessel that offered the sophisticated accommodations, cultural programming, and destination focus that aligned with both our interests and expectations. The ship featured lecture programs by art historians and cultural experts, shore excursions led by local guides with academic credentials, and the kind of elegant dining and entertainment options that would appeal to educated, affluent travelers. Mom, Celebrity Eclipse seems perfect for our interests, Rebecca had said after we'd completed our research. The cultural programming is exactly what you've enjoyed on your other trips, and the ship size and passenger demographics look ideal for sophisticated travelers rather than party cruise crowds. The itinerary we'd selected had been a 14-day Mediterranean voyage, with stops in Barcelona, Monte Carlo, Florence, Rome, Naples, Santorini, Mykonos, and Dubrovnik, destinations that would provide opportunities to explore everything from gaudy architecture to Renaissance art to ancient Greek archaeological sites. Rebecca had contributed significantly to the shore excursion planning, using her legal research skills to investigate tour operators, read traveler reviews, and identify experiences that would provide the most authentic and educational cultural exposure at each destination. I've found a private tour operator in Florence who provides exclusive access to the Uffizi after closing hours, Rebecca had reported during one of our planning sessions. The reviews are exceptional, and the guide has a PhD in Renaissance art. History. It would be exactly the kind of sophisticated cultural experience you love. Her research had also included practical considerations like travel insurance options, medical facilities at various ports, and communication arrangements that would ensure our safety and security throughout the voyage. I want to make sure we have comprehensive travel insurance that covers medical evacuation if necessary, Rebecca had said. I know you're in excellent health, but international travel always involves some risks, and I want us both to feel completely secure. The financial arrangements for our Mediterranean cruise had reflected both my substantial resources and my genuine excitement about sharing this experience with Rebecca. The total cost for premium balcony suites, all-shore excursions, specialty dining, and first-class airfare had been $34,000, a significant expense, but one that had seemed completely justified for what promised to be a transformative mother-daughter adventure. Mom, this is an incredibly generous gift, Rebecca had said when I'd insisted on covering all expenses for the trip. I want to contribute to the costs, especially since David and I are both doing well financially. Rebecca, this trip represents everything I've worked to achieve, I'd replied. I've spent 40 years building wealth specifically so I could enjoy experiences like this and share them with the people I love most. Having you join me makes this adventure even more meaningful. I'd also arranged for David to join us for the first week of the cruise, understanding that Rebecca would enjoy having her husband share part of the experience while also respecting their desire to spend vacation time together. David's airfare and accommodations had added another $8,000 to the total cost, but had seemed like a worthwhile investment in family harmony and shared memories. Margaret, this is an incredibly thoughtful arrangement, David had said when we'd finalized the plans. Having the opportunity to experience Mediterranean culture with someone who has your travel expertise and cultural knowledge will be educational and enriching for both Rebecca and me. The financial generosity had extended to pre-cruise arrangements as well. I'd booked us into the Ritz-Carlton in Miami for 2 nights before the cruise departure, had arranged for a private car service to handle all transportation, and had even purchased new luggage and travel wardrobes for Rebecca and David to ensure they felt appropriately dressed for the luxury cruise environment. Mom, you've thought of every detail, Rebecca had observed as we'd reviewed the comprehensive travel arrangements. This is going to be the trip of a lifetime. Throughout the spring and early summer of 2023, our cruise planning had been accompanied by growing excitement and anticipation that had brought Rebecca and me closer together than we'd been in years. Our weekly planning sessions had become opportunities for sophisticated conversations about art, history, culture, and travel that had demonstrated Rebecca's intellectual curiosity, while also providing outlets for sharing my travel expertise and cultural knowledge. I've been reading about Byzantine mosaics in preparation for our stops in Italy, Rebecca had told me during one of our conversations. Your descriptions of the art you saw during your Italy trip have inspired me to learn more about historical, artistic techniques and cultural influences. Rebecca's intellectual engagement with our travel plans had been deeply satisfying, validating my belief that sophisticated travel could be both personally enriching and a meaningful way to strengthen family relationships. Her questions about everything from ancient Greek philosophy to Renaissance political history had demonstrated that she'd inherited my curiosity and appreciation for cultural learning. Mom, I'm realizing that I've never really prioritized cultural education and travel the way you have, Rebecca had admitted during one of our planning conversations. My legal career has consumed so much time and energy that I've missed opportunities for the kind of intellectual growth that comes from experiencing different cultures and historical sites. The admission had been both touching and encouraging, suggesting that our cruise experience could introduce Rebecca to the kind of cultural exploration and international travel that had become central to my retirement happiness and personal fulfillment. We'd also begun planning post-cruise activities that would extend our time together and allow us to process and discuss the cultural experiences we'd shared during the voyage. I'd made reservations at a luxury resort in the French Riviera, where we could spend 3 additional days exploring local art galleries, visiting historical sites, and enjoying the kind of sophisticated leisure activities that would provide the perfect conclusion to our Mediterranean adventure. "This extended time together is exactly what our relationship needs," Rebecca had said as we'd finalized these additional arrangements. "Between your travel experiences and my legal career, we've both been so busy that we haven't had enough opportunities for the kind of meaningful conversations and shared experiences that strengthen family bonds." The weeks leading up to our cruise departure had been filled with family gatherings, social events, and celebrations that had demonstrated the genuine excitement and anticipation that surrounded our upcoming adventure. Rebecca and David had hosted several dinner parties where our travel plans had been the focus of sophisticated conversations with their friends and colleagues. "Rebecca and Margaret's Mediterranean cruise sounds absolutely incredible," Janet Morrison, one of Rebecca's law partners, had said during one of these gatherings. "The combination of luxury travel, cultural education, and mother-daughter bonding represents exactly the kind of meaningful experience that successful families should prioritize." The social validation had been accompanied by practical preparations that had demonstrated Rebecca's genuine commitment to ensuring our travel experience would be both safe and successful. She'd researched medical facilities at each port, had arranged for international phone plans that would ensure communication throughout our voyage, and had even prepared emergency contact information and medical histories that could be accessed, if needed. "I want everything to be perfect for this trip," Rebecca had told me as we'd completed our final preparations. "You've been so generous and thoughtful in planning this adventure, and I want to make sure we're prepared for every possibility." David had been equally supportive and excited about our travel plans, offering to handle any business or personal matters that might require attention while I was away, and expressing genuine appreciation for the opportunity to join us for part of the voyage. "Margaret, this cruise represents everything I've learned to appreciate about your approach to life," David had said during our farewell dinner at the Greenwich Country Club. "You've shown Rebecca and me that success should be measured, not just by professional achievement, but by the courage to pursue meaningful experiences and cultural enrichment." Standing in my Westport home that March morning, surrounded by cruise brochures, packing lists, and travel confirmations that represented months of collaborative planning and growing excitement, I'd had no understanding that Rebecca and David's enthusiasm for our family adventure had actually been part of a systematic plan to demonstrate my supposed incompetence and need for increased family supervision and control. The successful real estate developer who'd spent 6 months planning what she'd believed would be the most meaningful family experience of her retirement was about to discover that the daughter she'd trusted and invested in for decades had been using their shared travel planning as reconnaissance for a betrayal that would test every skill she'd developed during 40 years of strategic thinking and competitive business success. Sometimes the people who seem most excited about sharing your dreams are actually calculating how to use them against you. Rebecca and David were about to learn that the woman whose generosity they'd been exploiting was someone with the resources, intelligence, and determination to ensure their betrayal came with consequences they'd never anticipated and would never forget. Standing in my Westport home that March morning, still processing the subtle changes I'd begun noticing in Rebecca and David's attitude toward our cruise plans, I felt the first real tremors of doubt about whether the family adventure I'd been planning for 6 months would actually materialize the way I'd envisioned. But what I discovered in the weeks that followed would transform my disappointment and confusion into a cold, calculating determination that would change everything forever. The first indication that something had fundamentally changed in Rebecca and David's perspective had come during what should have been a routine final planning meeting in early July, just 6 weeks before our scheduled departure. Instead of the enthusiasm and collaborative spirit that had characterized our previous planning sessions, I'd encountered a series of concerns and suggestions that had seemed reasonable on the surface, but had actually represented the beginning of a systematic campaign to undermine my confidence and control over our travel arrangements. "Mom, I've been thinking about the cruise itinerary," Rebecca had said during our lunch meeting at the Greenwich Country Club, her tone carrying a subtle edge of concern that hadn't been present during our earlier conversations. Some of the shore excursions you've selected seem quite physically demanding for someone your age. The walking tours in Rome involve several miles of cobblestone streets, and the Santorini excursion includes significant climbing. The suggestion that I might not be physically capable of handling travel activities I'd been successfully managing for years had been both surprising and insulting, particularly given that my recent medical checkup had confirmed excellent health. For a 72-year-old woman who maintained an active lifestyle and regular exercise routine. "Rebecca, I've been walking several miles daily for decades," I'd replied, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. I completed much more demanding physical activities during my Egypt trip, including climbing inside pyramids and walking through desert archaeological sites in 100-degree heat. But Rebecca had been prepared with what appeared to be carefully researched counter-arguments that had focused on age-related risks and the differences between solo travel and family travel responsibilities. "Mom, I understand that you've handled challenging travel situations in the past," Rebecca had continued, "but this cruise represents different circumstances. David and I would feel responsible if something happened to you during activities we'd planned together. Maybe we should consider modifying some of the more strenuous excursions." David had immediately joined what was clearly a coordinated intervention, his pharmaceutical background weaponized to create medical concerns that would justify increased supervision and control over my travel decisions. "Margaret, Rebecca, and I have been researching cruise ship medical facilities and emergency evacuation procedures," David had said, producing a folder of printed materials that suggested they'd been investigating contingency plans without my knowledge or input. While cruise ships have basic medical capabilities, they're not equipped to handle serious emergencies that might require specialized cardiac or neurological care. The phrase specialized cardiac or neurological care had been particularly galling, given that I had no history of heart problems or cognitive issues and had been declared completely healthy during my recent comprehensive physical examination. "David, I'm not planning to have medical emergencies," I'd replied, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "I'm a healthy 72-year-old woman planning to enjoy cultural activities with my family. I don't need contingency plans for medical crises that aren't going to happen." Over the following weeks, Rebecca and David's concerns had evolved into a systematic campaign of subtle undermining that had gradually eroded the excitement and anticipation I'd been feeling about our family adventure while positioning them as the reasonable voices of caution, in contrast to my supposedly reckless optimism about my own capabilities. Every aspect of our travel plans had become subject to questioning and revision. The shore excursions I'd carefully selected based on my cultural interests and travel experience had been deemed too ambitious or potentially dangerous. The premium balcony suites I'd booked had been criticized as unnecessary luxury that could be downgraded to save money. Even the dining reservations and specialty restaurant selections had been questioned as too rich for elderly digestion. "Mom, we're concerned that you're not thinking realistically about the physical and logistical challenges of this cruise," Rebecca had said during one of our increasingly tense planning conversations. "Maybe we should consider a shorter, less demanding itinerary for your first cruise experience." The suggestion that I should accept a diminished travel experience because of my age had been particularly insulting, given that I'd already completed solo trips to Italy and Egypt that had been far more complex and demanding than a luxury cruise with full-service accommodations and professional tour guides. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of their intervention had been the way they'd begun researching travel insurance and medical coverage options without my knowledge, creating documentation that could be used to demonstrate the risks I was taking by pursuing international travel. "Margaret, we've been looking into comprehensive travel insurance that would cover medical evacuation and emergency treatment," David had said, presenting insurance options that included coverage levels far beyond what I'd ever needed or wanted. "The premiums are substantial, but they reflect the real risks associated with international travel for elderly passengers." The phrase elderly passengers had been particularly offensive, representing a fundamental change in how Rebecca and David had begun viewing me, not as an experienced international traveler with sophisticated cultural interests, but as a liability requiring special supervision and protection. The confrontation that would shatter my trust in Rebecca and David forever had occurred during what I'd expected to be our final pre-departure meeting in early August, just 2 weeks before our scheduled cruise departure. Instead of confirming arrangements and expressing excitement about our upcoming adventure, Rebecca and David had presented what was clearly a coordinated ultimatum designed to force me to accept their control over every aspect of our travel experience. "Mom, David and I have been discussing the cruise arrangements extensively," Rebecca had said, her tone carrying the authoritative edge she typically reserved for difficult legal negotiations. "We've identified several concerns that need to be addressed before we can proceed with the trip as currently planned." The list of concerns they'd presented had been remarkably comprehensive and had addressed every aspect of our travel arrangements, with the kind of detailed criticism that could only have been developed through systematic planning and coordination. Shore excursions would need to be limited to activities that required minimal walking and no climbing. Dining arrangements would need to focus on simple, familiar foods rather than exotic cuisines that might cause digestive problems. Evening entertainment would need to exclude late-night activities that might interfere with sleep schedules. Medical documentation would need to include comprehensive health records and emergency contact procedures. "Rebecca, these restrictions would eliminate everything that makes luxury cruise travel appealing and educational," I'd replied, recognizing that their concerns would transform our sophisticated cultural adventure into something resembling medical supervision disguised as family vacation. But the most shocking revelation had been their proposal to modify our cabin arrangements in ways that would have eliminated my privacy and independence while positioning them as my caretakers and supervisors. "We think it would be safer if we booked connecting suites so we can monitor your well-being and provide assistance if needed," David had said. The medical literature clearly indicates that elderly travelers benefit from family supervision, particularly during overnight hours when medical emergencies are most likely to occur. The suggestion that I needed overnight medical supervision had been so insulting and controlling that I'd finally understood the true scope of what Rebecca and David had been planning. This wasn't about family bonding or shared cultural experiences. It was about demonstrating my supposed incompetence and establishing their authority over my travel decisions and financial resources. "David, I've been traveling independently for years without requiring medical supervision," I'd said, my voice carrying the kind of cold anger that had served me well during difficult business negotiations. "I don't need family members monitoring my sleep schedule or providing assistance with basic daily activities." But Rebecca and David had been prepared for my resistance, responding with what was clearly a coordinated strategy designed to position my objections as evidence of cognitive decline and poor judgment. "Mom, denial about age-related limitations is actually a common symptom of early dementia," Rebecca had said, using her legal training to present medical claims that would be difficult to refute without professional evaluation. "Many elderly people don't recognize when their judgment becomes impaired, which is exactly why family members need to intervene for their safety and well-being." The suggestion that my resistance to their control was evidence of cognitive impairment had been so manipulative and insulting that I'd left our meeting with a determination to investigate exactly what Rebecca and David had been planning behind my back. The next morning, while they were both at work, I'd made the decision that would expose the full scope of their betrayal and provide the foundation for everything that would follow. Using the emergency key Rebecca had given me years earlier, I'd entered their Upper East Side apartment to search for evidence of whatever planning had preceded their systematic attempt to control our cruise arrangements. What I'd found in David's home office had been more devastating than anything I could have imagined. A detailed folder labeled Margaret Cruise Intervention had contained not just documentation of their concerns about my travel capabilities, but evidence of months of systematic planning to use our family cruise as a way to demonstrate my supposed incompetence while positioning themselves to control my future travel decisions and financial resources. The folder had included email correspondence with travel insurance companies designed to create documentation that I was a high-risk traveler who required special supervision, medical research about age-related travel risks that could be used to justify their intervention, financial projections showing how much money I could save by accepting more conservative travel arrangements. But the most shocking discovery had been a detailed plan for what they'd privately called Operation Cruise Control, a systematic strategy to abandon me at the Miami cruise terminal while they proceeded with the vacation I'd paid for, leaving me to deal with the humiliation and logistical nightmare of being stranded while they enjoyed the luxury cruise experience at my expense. Phase 1. Create medical concerns that justify supervision requirements, the document had outlined. Phase 2. Modify travel arrangements to establish our authority over her decisions. Phase 3. Demonstrate her incompetence through controlled abandonment scenario. The plan had been remarkably sophisticated and cruel. They'd intended to accompany me to Miami, help me check into the pre-cruise hotel, and then inform me the morning of departure that they'd decided the cruise was too risky for my health and safety. They would then leave for the cruise while I remained stranded in Miami, forcing me to either attempt the cruise alone, which they could later use as evidence of my poor judgment, or return home in humiliation, which would validate their claims about my incompetence. Margaret's reaction to the abandonment will provide clear evidence of her inability to handle travel stress and unexpected situations, the document had continued. This will establish grounds for increased family supervision of her financial decisions and travel planning. The discovery of Operation Cruise Control had transformed my hurt and disappointment into something much colder and more determined. Rebecca and David had systematically planned to betray my trust, steal the vacation I'd paid for, and use the experience to justify increased control over my independence and financial resources. But what they hadn't anticipated was that the woman they were planning to manipulate was someone with 40 years of experience in strategic thinking and competitive business success. My first call had been to Patricia Williams, the estate planning attorney who'd handled my business legal work for over a decade and who specialized in elder abuse cases involving family financial manipulation. Mrs. Sinclair, what you're describing represents a textbook case of elder financial abuse disguised as family concern, Patricia had said after I'd explained the situation and provided copies of the documents I'd discovered. Your daughter and son-in-law have been systematically planning to control your assets while using emotional manipulation to justify their interference. Patricia had explained that the travel intervention, insurance manipulation, and planned abandonment constituted clear evidence of a coordinated campaign to restrict my autonomy while positioning themselves to control my financial decisions for their own benefit rather than my well-being. The fact that they've been planning this for months while accepting your financial support for the cruise shows premeditation and systematic deception, Patricia had continued. This isn't spontaneous family concern, it's calculated abuse, designed to establish legal grounds for guardianship or conservatorship proceedings. My second call had been to Dr. Sarah Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations and could provide professional documentation of my mental acuity and decision-making capacity. Mrs. Sinclair, based on our conversation and your description of the complex business and travel planning you've been managing independently, any suggestion that you lack capacity to make your own decisions would be medically unsupportable, Dr. Chen had said. I'd be happy to conduct a comprehensive competency evaluation that would provide legal documentation of your cognitive abilities. My third call had been to Marcus Rodriguez, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases and could help me document the full scope of Rebecca and David's deception, while also developing evidence that could be used in legal proceedings if necessary. Mrs. Sinclair, the The systematic nature of their planning suggests this has been in development for quite some time, Marcus had said after reviewing the evidence I'd gathered. I can help you document their unauthorized access to your personal information, their manipulation of travel arrangements, and their financial motivations for controlling your assets. Working with my legal and investigative team, I'd spent the following week developing a comprehensive response strategy that would not only protect my independence, but would also ensure that Rebecca and David faced appropriate consequences for their systematic betrayal of my trust and their attempt to steal the vacation I'd paid for. The strategy had multiple components, each designed to address different aspects of their deception, while also demonstrating that underestimating a 72-year-old international business veteran had been the most expensive mistake of their privileged lives. The first component had been a complete restructuring of my financial arrangements to ensure that Rebecca and David could never again access information about my assets or interfere with my travel planning. I'd transferred my investment accounts to a new firm, changed all my passwords and security information, and established new banking relationships that included explicit instructions that no family members were authorized to receive information about my finances. The second component had been a legal document package that included a new will, healthcare directives, and power of attorney arrangements that explicitly excluded Rebecca and David from any role in my financial or medical decision-making, while also including specific language about their attempted manipulation and control. Let it be specifically noted, the new will had stated, that these changes to my estate planning are made while I am of sound mind and clear judgment, in response to systematic attempts by my daughter Rebecca Morrison and her husband David Morrison to control my financial decisions and manipulate my travel arrangements through deception and emotional abuse. The third component had been what I'd privately called Operation Presidential Suite, a carefully planned response that would demonstrate my complete independence while ensuring that Rebecca and David experienced immediate and lasting consequences for their attempted betrayal. The confrontation that would change our family dynamics forever had occurred exactly as Rebecca and David had planned, in the luxury hotel suite I'd booked for our pre-cruise stay in Miami. But instead of being surprised and devastated by their abandonment, I'd been fully prepared with documentation, witnesses, and a response strategy that would transform their moment of triumph into the beginning of their own nightmare. Mom, David, and I have made a difficult decision about the cruise, Rebecca had said on the morning of our scheduled departure, her voice carrying what she'd probably thought was appropriate concern and regret. We've realized that the medical risks and logistical challenges are simply too great for someone your age. We think it would be best if you returned home while David and I proceed with a modified version of the cruise to evaluate whether this type of travel would be appropriate for future family trips. The speech had been delivered exactly as their planning documents had outlined, designed to position their theft of my vacation as a medical necessity rather than calculated betrayal. But what they hadn't expected was my response. Rebecca, I'm completely aware of your Operation Cruise Control plan, I'd said, producing copies of their planning documents while Patricia Williams and Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the adjoining hotel suite where they'd been waiting with video recording equipment. I know about your systematic planning to abandon me here while you steal the vacation I paid for. The look of shock and growing panic on Rebecca and David's faces had been immediately satisfying, but even more gratifying had been watching them realize that their careful planning had been discovered and documented by professionals who understood exactly what they'd been attempting. Mom, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but Rebecca had begun, but I'd interrupted her, with documentation that had made denial impossible. I have copies of your emails about creating medical concerns, your research into travel insurance fraud, and your detailed timeline for what you called controlled abandonment, I'd continued. I also have professional evaluations confirming my mental competency and legal documentation of your attempted financial abuse. Patricia Williams had then stepped forward to deliver the legal notifications that would formalize the consequences of their attempted betrayal. Ms. Morrison, You and your husband are hereby notified that Mrs. Sinclair has filed complaints with the Florida Department of Elder Affairs, the New York State Attorney General's Office, and the American Bar Association regarding your attempted financial manipulation and abuse of an elderly family member, Patricia had announced. You're also being served with cease and desist orders prohibiting any further interference with Mrs. Sinclair's financial or travel arrangements. While Rebecca and David had been processing the legal implications of their exposed betrayal, I'd been implementing the most satisfying aspect of my response strategy. Using the contacts and expertise I'd developed during 40 years of luxury travel and business networking, I'd upgraded my cruise accommodations to the ship's presidential suite, a 200-square-foot luxury accommodation with personal butler, service, private balcony, and exclusive access to amenities that represented the ultimate in cruise ship luxury. Mrs. Sinclair, we're honored to accommodate someone with your travel experience and cultural sophistication, Captain Alessandro Romano had said, as he'd personally welcomed me aboard Celebrity Eclipse. Your reputation as a discerning traveler has preceded you, and our crew is committed to ensuring this becomes the most memorable cruise experience of your distinguished travel career. The presidential suite had cost $47,000 for the 14-day voyage, more than the original cost of all 3 family accommodations combined. But every dollar had been automatically charged to the family cruise account that Rebecca and David had eagerly co-signed, assuming it would give them control over my spending rather than unlimited liability for my choices. Mrs. Sinclair, your suite features a grand piano, formal dining room, and personal concierge service. Maria Santos, my personal butler, had explained during the orientation tour. We've also arranged for private shore excursions with expert guides, exclusive access to cultural sites, and dining experiences that reflect your sophisticated interests in art history and international cuisine. The cruise experience that followed had exceeded even my most ambitious expectations. Private tours of the Vatican with art historians who'd provided insights unavailable to general tourists. Exclusive access to archaeological sites in Greece, with professional archaeologists who'd explained discoveries not yet published in academic literature. Culinary experiences in French Michelin-starred restaurants that had been arranged specifically for my cultural education and enjoyment. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire experience had been the knowledge that every luxury accommodation, every exclusive excursion, and every sophisticated cultural experience was being automatically charged to Rebecca and David's credit cards while they dealt with the legal and financial consequences of their attempted betrayal. The presidential suite cruise had been just the beginning of the financial education Rebecca and David would receive about the cost of attempting to control someone with substantial resources and international connections. Upon returning from the Mediterranean, I'd immediately booked a luxury river cruise through Europe, followed by a cultural expedition to Southeast Asia, and then a luxury train journey through South America, each experience more expensive and exclusive than the last. Mrs. Sinclair, your travel experiences represent exactly the kind of sophisticated cultural education that discerning travelers seek, Dr. Patricia Chen, Director of Exclusive Cultural Expeditions, had told me during the planning for my South American journey. Your combination of cultural knowledge, travel experience, and financial resources allows us to create customized experiences that would be impossible for typical travelers. Each subsequent trip had been charged to the family cruise account, with Rebecca and David receiving detailed documentation of every expense, every luxury accommodation, and every exclusive cultural experience they'd attempted to prevent me from enjoying. The river cruise had cost $38,000. The Southeast Asia expedition had been $52,000. The South American luxury train experience had totaled $67,000. Mom, the cruise charges are completely out of control, Rebecca had called to say during my second week on the South American train. Our credit cards are nearly maxed out, and we can't continue carrying these expenses. Rebecca, I'm having the most extraordinary cultural experiences of my life, I'd replied from my luxury train suite while watching the Andes Mountains pass by my window. The private guided tours, the exclusive museum access, the sophisticated culinary experiences, everything represents exactly the kind of travel you and David told me I was too old and incompetent to manage independently. By the time I'd completed my year of luxury travel experiences, the total charges to Rebecca and David's credit cards had exceeded $89,000, and they'd been forced to take a second mortgage on their Manhattan co-op to manage the debt service while also dealing with the legal costs associated with the elder abuse complaints I'd filed. The legal ramifications of Rebecca and David's attempted manipulation had been far more severe and lasting than the financial consequences. The elder abuse complaints I'd filed with multiple agencies had triggered investigations that had exposed their systematic planning, while also creating professional consequences that had affected both their careers and their social standing. The New York State Bar Association had opened a disciplinary investigation into Rebecca's conduct, focusing on her use of legal research skills to develop strategies for manipulating an elderly family member's financial decisions. The investigation had included interviews with colleagues, reviews of her professional conduct, and evaluations of whether her actions had violated the ethical standards required for continued bar membership. Rebecca Morrison's systematic planning to manipulate and abandon an elderly family member demonstrates a fundamental lack of the moral character required for legal practice. The Bar Association's preliminary report had concluded. Her use of legal research skills to develop elder abuse strategies raises serious questions about her fitness to continue practicing law. David's pharmaceutical career had been similarly affected when his employer had learned about his use of medical research to create false health concerns that could justify controlling an elderly family member's travel decisions. The company's ethics review had concluded that his conduct violated professional standards for healthcare-related professionals. David Morrison's manipulation of medical information to justify elder abuse represents a serious violation of the ethical principles that govern pharmaceutical professionals, his employer's human resources director had written in a termination letter. His systematic deception about health risks demonstrates unfitness for positions requiring medical knowledge and ethical judgment. Perhaps the most satisfying consequences had been the social and community recognition that my response to Rebecca and David's betrayal had demonstrated exactly what happens when people underestimate someone based on age-related assumptions about capability and vulnerability. The story of my cruise triumph had spread throughout Greenwich and Manhattan's social circles, where I'd become something of a legend among sophisticated travelers and successful retirees who appreciated the way I'd turned attempted control into complete independence. Margaret Sinclair has become an inspiration for anyone who's ever been underestimated because of their age, Catherine Walsh, president of the Greenwich Travel Club, had said during a presentation where I'd been invited to share my experiences. Her response to family betrayal demonstrates that wisdom, resources, and determination can overcome any attempt at manipulation or control. The recognition had led to invitations to speak at retirement communities, travel organizations, and women's professional groups throughout Connecticut and New York, where my story had inspired other senior citizens to pursue their own travel dreams while also providing practical advice about protecting independence from family members who might prioritize inheritance over autonomy. Mrs. Sinclair's experiences demonstrate that successful aging requires not just financial resources, but also the courage to defend your independence against anyone who tries to limit your choices. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, director of the Westport Senior Center, had observed. Her victory over attempted manipulation has inspired dozens of our members to pursue travel adventures they'd been postponing due to family pressures. 2 years after the cruise confrontation that had changed everything, I was thriving in ways that had exceeded my most optimistic expectations about what retirement could be. My Westport home had been sold for $3.2 million, and I'd purchased a stunning waterfront penthouse in Key West that had provided the perfect base for the sophisticated travel lifestyle that had become my primary source of joy and purpose. The Key West penthouse had been everything I'd dreamed of. 2,800 square feet of luxury accommodation with panoramic ocean views, private marina access, and proximity to the cultural amenities and international airport connections that had made it ideal for someone who traveled extensively throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. Eleanor, you've created exactly the kind of retirement lifestyle that most people only dream about. Catherine Sanderson, my new neighbor and fellow sophisticated traveler, had observed during one of our evening walks along the harbor. Your travel experiences and cultural knowledge make you one of the most interesting residents in our community. My new will, drafted by Patricia Williams and executed with witnesses from the Key West legal community, had reflected my changed priorities and relationships. The bulk of my estate would support cultural and educational organizations that provided travel scholarships for senior citizens, while Rebecca and David would receive minimal bequests that acknowledged their relationship without rewarding their attempted control. Let it be specifically noted, the will had stated, that these limited bequests to my daughter Rebecca Morrison and her husband David Morrison reflect their demonstrated willingness to prioritize their own financial interests over my independence and happiness. Their attempts to manipulate my travel plans and control my financial decisions have shown that they view my resources as their entitlement, rather than respecting my autonomy as an independent adult. The Margaret Catherine Sinclair Travel Fellowship would provide annual grants of $30,000 to applicants over 65 who could demonstrate genuine interest in cultural exploration, but lacked the financial resources to pursue sophisticated international travel independently. 3 years after the confrontation that had revealed Rebecca and David's true character, I was living proof that sometimes the best response to people who try to control your golden years is showing them exactly how spectacular those years can be when you're free to pursue your own dreams and adventures. My travel experiences had expanded to include luxury expeditions to Antarctica, cultural tours through Central Asia, and archaeological adventures in remote locations that had enriched my understanding of world history and different cultures, while also providing the kind of personal challenge and intellectual stimulation that had kept me energized and engaged. Mrs. Sinclair, your travel experiences and cultural knowledge have made you one of our most valued expedition members. Dr. Alessandro Martinelli, expedition leader for my Antarctica voyage, had told me. Your ability to engage with complex historical and scientific information, while also managing challenging travel conditions, demonstrates that age truly is just a number when combined with curiosity and determination. Rebecca and David's consequences had been permanent and comprehensive. The financial stress of carrying $89,000 in travel-related debt had forced them to sell their Manhattan co-op and relocate to a modest apartment in Queens. Rebecca's law license had been suspended pending completion of the Bar Association's ethics investigation. David had been forced to take a lower-paying position at a small pharmaceutical company after his termination from his previous employer. Margaret, we understand now that we made the most catastrophic mistake of our lives when we tried to control your travel plans, Rebecca had written in a letter that had reached me during my second year in Key West. We lost not just your financial support and presence in our lives, but also our careers, our home, and our standing in the community. We have no excuse for our greed and manipulation except to say we deeply regret betraying someone who had sacrificed so much for our success. But the most meaningful aspect of my victory had been the way it had inspired other senior citizens to defend their own independence and pursue their own dreams, despite family pressures or social expectations about appropriate behavior for elderly people. Eleanor Sinclair has shown us that respect for elderly family members isn't optional, and that attempting to control someone with substantial resources and international experience is a recipe for disaster. Margaret Patterson, director of the Connecticut Association for Independent Seniors, had said during a conference where I'd been the keynote speaker. Standing on my Key West balcony at sunset, watching the water turn golden while planning my upcoming cultural expedition to Southeast Asia, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the complete validation of my right to live according to my own values and priorities. I'd fought for my independence, my travel dreams, and my right to spend my retirement years pursuing the cultural experiences that gave my life meaning and purpose, and I'd won completely. The $89,000 that Rebecca and David had been forced to pay for my luxury travel experiences had been a small price for teaching them that respect and independence weren't negotiable at any age. If someone in your life is trying to control your dreams based on their financial interests rather than your well-being, remember my story. Remember that age is not a limitation when you have resources, intelligence, and the determination to fight for your right to live according to your own values. Remember that people who try to steal your independence might discover they've challenged someone with the capability to ensure they regret their greed for the rest of their lives. What's your story? Have you ever had to fight back against family members who tried to control your choices for their own benefit? Share it in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe for more stories about turning your biggest family betrayal into your most empowering victory. Because sometimes the best response to people who try to abandon you at a cruise, Doc is showing them exactly how magnificent that cruise can be when you upgrade to the presidential suite and leave them with the bills. Rebecca and David thought they could steal my vacation and control my independence. What they actually did was finance the most extraordinary year of travel in my life, while learning that some people fight back with consequences that last forever. Sometimes the people who try to control your golden years end up funding them instead. That's a lesson worth $89,000, and every dollar was worth it to prove that respect and independence aren't negotiable at 72 or any other age. Justice served. Independence earned. Adventure continues. The world is still full of places I haven't seen, cultures I haven't experienced, and people I haven't met. And thanks to Rebecca and David's attempt to control me, I now have both the financial means and the moral certainty to explore every single one of them. Bon voyage to anyone who thinks they can limit the dreams of someone who refuses to accept other people's assumptions about what's possible. The view from 75 is spectacular, and it's only getting better with every passport stamp I collect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.